I love the action. I love the buzz. I love all of the motion and all the activity in the kitchen was really very stimulating. The beginner's imposter syndrome, beginner's nerves, when that stuff started to subside, it just was really, really fun. And I didn't look back.
UnLost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. UnLost Cause shares stories that inspire courage to reclaim your dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and today we dive into the journey of someone who left behind the high-stakes world of finance to create something tangible, delicious, and rooted in the community. Brian Staub swapped the trading floor for the kitchen floor, proving that it's never too late to start fresh. If you've ever dreamed of making a bold pivot in your life, this episode's for you. Well, welcome, Brian. And let's first start with a lot of things start in childhood, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what was your first brush with either entrepreneurship or food?
Great question. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. One of my earliest memories from childhood about food, at least, was cooking in the kitchen with my mom. She was a really good cook. She had a lot of recipes that were, her standard special recipes that we all had our favorites. And I used to really like to help her in the kitchen cooking. Before that, I really loved eating, but then I really got more interested in the making and the preparation and the cooking part of it as well.
Yeah. And what was your favorite homemade recipe?
My mom used to make these little pastries called rugula, and they were made with a dough, and she had cinnamon sugar and some raisins and some walnuts, and they were rolled together. It's kind of like a traditional, old Jewish pastry, and hers were amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And do you remember about how old you were when you were helping her out on that?
I must have been, I want to say probably 7 or 8 years old when I really first started. But then I took a really, sort of long hiatus from it, not deliberately, but it wasn't a serious hobby for me until adulthood.
Yeah. No, I'd love to learn more about the backstory before you started. So then you had this passion early on with your mom and in the kitchen, the family, but then you ended up going down a different career path, right? So tell me about what you studied and why you went into that field of study and then your eventual profession.
Yeah, it was sort of serendipitous and not really planned the way it turned out. I studied international relations in college, which was a combination of economics, history, and political science. I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to major in, but I knew actually at the time when I was an undergrad, my plan was to go to law school. And when I graduated from undergrad, I got a job working for a hedge fund group in their legal department because I wanted to take some time off before committing to going to law school. And so I worked in the legal department for 2 years. And then I decided, long story short, not to go to law school. And then they gave me that I was able to get a job on the trading floor.
Yeah. And then while you were, going down that profession, did it ever occur to you that like this passion that you had as a child, were you indulging in any way, or is it just, were you becoming a foodie and trying new things, or were you still cooking at home? Or I know that pilot light didn't fully extinguish, so
Right.
what was burning in the backside?
Yeah, I became a foodie. Part of living in New York City, I've also spent some time working overseas in the UK, and having an opportunity to travel really kind of fueled my passion for food. There was a lot of social activity that revolved around dinners and restaurants and going to nice places and things like that, and I really loved doing that. And at the same time, with the advent of probably the Food Network and the internet and all of the tutorials and all of the things, all the content that had just exploded about food and food preparation, and I kind of devoured, so to speak, as much as I could of that stuff. And then just sort of started like experimenting in the kitchen, finding recipes to make and things like that. And there was something really gratifying about making something from scratch. A lot of the things that we sort of take for granted and generally tend to buy in the supermarket or eat in restaurants, to have like a real appreciation for where they come from, how they're actually made, and then actually doing it yourself and watching it come together. And most importantly, I think for me, is also sharing it with other people and having them enjoy it as well.
Yeah. And then so before you jumped and became a restaurateur, what were maybe the 3 or 5 years before you jumped in. So it sounds like you were thriving in this financial services world. Was it still bringing you a lot of joy and satisfaction in the financial services, or were you feeling burnt out? So to share with the readers and the audience, what was it like?
I think it was a little bit of a confluence of events, and I was still gratified by it, but gradually less and less. And I think that my experience has been in the last 5 or 10 years that people of my contemporaries, it's happening more and more that whether they take the leap or not, if you're used to doing something for a really long time, one of a few things could happen. The industry that you're in could evolve into something that makes it different than it was when you started. And there's also, the tedium of doing the same stuff for really long periods of time, an itch to do something radically different.
Yeah. So what to do something radically or to do something different in the TDM and the change, was it more of like a slow burn, or was there some type of event that really jolted you where you were like, oh, I need to take a step back and do some reevaluation?
I think it was a slow burn. I was at one specific firm for a really long period of time. In my 20 something year career in financial markets, I worked at two different places. And for an industry where there tends to be a lot of jumping around, I was pretty proud of that and gratified. But, it was working well for both me and for the organization. And so it was a really good run, and I felt like I was at home. And then a number of things changed, partly the industry, partly the firm, partly the dynamics with personnel changes and things like that.
Yeah.
And I felt like I needed to make a change. So the first phase of the change was to look for other opportunities within the industry. Maybe it wasn't the industry and maybe it wasn't me. Maybe it was just time to move on to a different place. That was an arduous process. And I came to the conclusion ultimately that starting over wasn't really what I wanted to do, or at least starting over in the same industry at a new firm wasn't really what I was looking for. So I think that once I made the decision to change my place of employment, it sort of evolved from there.
Yeah.
So from changing firms to really changing careers and lifestyle.
Yeah. So it sounds like if I replay that back, it was first, the firm has changed. So you're thinking maybe I should change firms in the same industry. And
Yeah.
then you're thinking, I don't really want to start over. I don't want to be in the same industry. So then it sounds like you get an opportunity to take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
And was food the first option you thought of? Or did you look at a whole array of different options before you settled on maybe scratching that itch around food?
I did a little dabbling and a little bit of investigation of other types of careers that were, sort of tangential to what I used to do. And that didn't sound very satisfying to me. And so, the sequence of events led me eventually from changing firms to really making a pretty radical, pretty
Yeah.
radical leap.
And Brian, did anyone else know about this passion that around food and potentially opening a restaurant in your life?
My family certainly knew because I was the primary cook in the house. I was the main person cooking. So everybody and my wife it's just not her thing. She loves a number of other things. Cooking is not her favorite thing to do. So by almost a little bit by default, but also because I really liked it and felt like I was getting good at it, it took up more of my time. And it was really part of my like everyday sort of responsibilities. And I really loved doing it. So I think my family was, kind of had an inkling, but, there's a big difference between sort of, hobbies and big career changes and investments and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And did anyone in your family or when you're doing hosting and you're cooking for other people, did they ever say to you either in jest or in all serious, like, Brian, this is delicious. You should like think about opening a restaurant or catering or
Right.
anything like that?
I don't remember. I mean, I remember people certainly enjoying and complimenting me, and that felt really good. And I really liked watching people enjoy, and I could see that I was getting better at it. But I don't remember anybody's. It may have come up once or twice, but probably more like in passing. And
Yeah.
I didn't really necessarily take it too seriously until it was more of a, what am I going to do with my life? Because I kind of know I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good transition. So, Brian, let's talk about now you're thinking about it more seriously. How much planning did you do? And that could be financial, that could be talking to your family, that could be like support systems? Like, how much planning did you do leading up to before you left?
Quite a bit. I started doing some research into culinary schools. I ultimately went to get my certificate in culinary arts. So I did some research into school. I knew I wasn't prepared. I knew I wasn't knowledgeable enough to just sort of jump in. So I knew I needed to educate myself. Financially, had some advice and some advisors, take a look at our financial situation to give us a little bit more comfort that this was something that we could afford to invest it, the time and the capital. So that gave us a little bit more comfort in that this is something that was really viable without really putting too much of our financial situation at risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it became a lot of legwork, a lot of introductions, a lot of networking, just to kind of get a sense of how would one do this if one were to do this. And then in 2018, I went to culinary school, and the culinary school that I went to also offered a program called Restaurant Business Management. So both programs were about a year long. One was in the morning, one was in the afternoon, and the restaurant business management course it seemed like it was almost custom made for me because it walked you through every step of how you build a restaurant concept and business plan of everything from safety and sanitation to menu development to lease negotiations, employment law, financials, everything. So that was for the most of the year. And so in the morning, I was in class working on my business plan. And in the afternoons, I was cooking in the kitchen.
Yeah. Which one was more fun?
Uh, they were both really interesting.
Yeah.
I like the tactile kind of part of cooking, and we got to eat what we cooked
Yeah.
afterwards, so that was good too. And I met a lot of interesting people. I was by far the oldest person in school. I found it to be refreshing. It was just a really good. For me, I felt like it was a really good change of scenery and just to kind of like interacting with a different crowd than I used to professionally.
Yeah. And so you mentioned you're the oldest student in these classes. Like, how old were you at that time when you enrolled?
So when I enrolled, it was 2018, I was 45.
Okay. So you're 45, and UnLost Cause chronicles people who are 40 and older who took the leap. So most of your classmates, were they in their 20s, like, or what's the age range there?
I'd say probably early to mid 20s. There are a lot of hospitality people that they really, really wanted to, broaden their education and get more formal credentials in that world. And a number of former military people that, wanted to embark on a new career. And yeah, so I would say mid 20s was probably the average.
Yeah. And then how did it feel like to be the oldest? Was there like, hey, is there some imposter syndrome? Am I not fitting in? Or like, hey, I've got a lot more knowledge, so I've got an upper hand? Or like, how did it feel to be the oldest there?
I liked it. I got along well with people. I made some good friends that I'm still friends with now. I was probably a little bit more nervous than I, in retrospect, needed to be, just in terms of kind of fish out of water
Yeah.
type stuff. And also knowing that I'm, you know, 20 years older than most of my classmates. But I found it really easy and really fun. And it actually, made me feel good that I can kind of hang with these younger people and I don't think they were making fun of me too much, but
Yeah. Well, I also love the refreshing attitude about how you were saying that you're learning a lot, right? And how that's refreshing in a different environment. And I think that's one of the, greatest gifts in life is if we can continue to learn and keep our minds fresh and our skills up to date. So I love that attitude. But
I also think that what I lacked, and maybe I'm jumping forward, but what I lacked in terms of knowledgeability about the hospitality world, I kind of made up for hopefully in other experience and maturity and appreciation for business, affinity for numbers and financials and stuff like that. Gave me a lot more confidence than I would have had without it.
yeah. So we all know restaurants are notoriously hard, challenging businesses for a variety of reasons. And now let's rewind. So you finish your classes and now you feel even more equipped on culinary arts and then also the restaurant management. So then what are the kind of ensuing chapters about finding a restaurant, developing a concept, etc.?
Okay. So When I graduated from both programs, it was probably around Thanksgiving of 2018. In order to get my certificate for the culinary program, I needed to do an externship in a restaurant kitchen
Okay.
for 2 months. So, I was a 45-year-old at I was the low man on the totem pole, which was humbling at my age after a long career doing something else. It had been a long time since I was the low man on the totem pole, which was interesting. It was hard. It was intimidating, figuring out how to do things and learning how the kitchen works and developing these habits. I had learned a lot of stuff in culinary school that made me feel like a little bit confident, but the real live world of a real dinner service in a busy restaurant is intense and intimidating. But I loved it, and it was really kind of affirming how much I learned, how much I enjoyed it, and there was actually some parallels to the financial world, just in terms of the intensity and the pace and the fact that everything's happening in real time and the stress that goes along with that too. But I loved the action. I loved the buzz. I loved the all of the motion and all the activity in the kitchen was really very stimulating. And the beginners, I don't know, imposter syndrome, beginners nerves. When that stuff started to subside, it just was really, really fun. And I didn't look back.
Awesome. Awesome. So you do this externship. So low man on the totem pole, which I'm sure gives you a lot more appreciation to your own staff nowadays. But
Absolutely.
so then after that, so you do it for 2 months. And then what happens after that 2 months?
Okay, so we're in early 2019, and now I'm refining my business plan. I'm doing some preliminary marketing to raise capital to start this venture. So that takes a lot of 2019. Also, networking, trying to keep myself informed, and I met some really great people that were really gracious and generous with their time and their advice, and made some progress, raised some money. That was really hard. That was really intense. And it was really, this is what's going to make or break this plan. And, if you don't get to the number that you need to get to, it's going to be really hard to execute. That part of it for me was probably the most nerve-wracking.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that, Brian?
Sure.
So you mentioned it's the most nerve-wracking, and I think that most of the guests that we've had on Lost Cause have jumped into something which did not require raising capital. Now, my 3 prior startups were all VC backed, so required it, and I know how hard and challenging it is.
Yeah.
And then, so your plan was predicated on raising capital, right? So your dreams, was that the case?
Well, at least I assumed so.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the alternative would have been if not to have taken on
Yeah.
a lot of debt myself. Maybe I could have borrowed the money. I maybe could have gotten a loan. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, this was make or break.
Got it. So there was no idea of like, hey, I'm going to do catering at home using my own kind of kitchen or a food truck to mitigate some of these costs. This was like, my dream is to have a restaurant, which does require more capital, of course.
Yeah, I mean, some of that stuff did occur to me, and I don't remember exactly what the arguments against the food truck idea were. I didn't end up pursuing it seriously. And I think that that was part of what I learned. And I wish I remembered the actual rationale, but I think that it was part of my course of study in the restaurant business management course that talked about the pitfalls of food trucks and why they might not be the best investment. So I kind of was sort of steered away from that a little bit. As far as catering, interestingly enough, we could get to it as we get into the next phase of the journey. But no, I mean, I think that the concept that I had developed in school that continued to develop and evolve, really the dream became having my own brick and mortar place where I could welcome people and bring them in. And that was, being there and giving guests an experience became part and parcel of the plan. And truthfully, in my mid to late 40s now, this wasn't going to be a 10-year long process to ultimately get to the point of building and owning a restaurant.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The runway's not as long when you're older,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay. No, so thank you. That makes a lot of sense. So your dream, brick and mortar, you like the buzz, you like to see the satisfaction and joy that people are having when they're dining on your food. So
And to design the space and to really create the whole thing,
yeah.
the whole experience.
Yeah. And I know we have a lot of listeners who also have, restaurant ownership or dreams. So to help them understand. So now you've raised financing, which you admitted was challenging. So then what is the next?
Well, I hadn't actually.
Oh,
The capital raising process was long and it was arduous and it was and it at times very discouraging.
yes.
And it really became, well, when you're involved in an endeavor like this, or at least in my experience, you start prospecting with those who you think have the best probability of buying in.
Yes.
And as you go down that list and you get no's, you're now left with less likely
Hmm.
investors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you get down, as you go further down, it can really be scary that you're just not going to meet your goal.
Yeah.
So I spent most of 2019 doing that. I had probably raised about, I think, probably like a third of what the goal was. And then COVID.
Oh, geez.
So I was confused and trying to figure this is before the pandemic, and you'll probably appreciate this. It's a tricky threading the needle endeavor. In order to raise money, a lot of people would tell me, okay, yeah, keep me posted because they'll want to see what the take up is from everybody else, number one. And number two, it becomes a lot more real when you actually have a space.
Yeah.
When you have a space, you have an address, you have a location, you have a size, you can really do pro forma sales numbers because you know how many seats you have and you know what your rent is going to be. And until you do that, a lot of it is very arbitrary and subjective.
Very good point.
So you need a space to get investors and you need money to sign the lease.
Yeah.
So you might find yourself in a position where you have to decide whether to sign the lease and you're not yet at your goal.
Yeah. And that's scary because restaurant leases are like 10 years or 7 years,
Yeah,
right?
they are. Yeah, 10 years is really the standard and spaces go.
Yeah.
So you have to act fast and you have to be confident that you're going to reach the rest of your goal when you have something tangible, more tangible to be able to show your potential investors. That was a tricky, balancing act and it was nerve-wracking. We got to the point where I think we had raised either a third or a half of what our goal was. And so I started to contact real estate agents and really start going to look at spaces. There were a couple that I found, and we put in some very like lowball offers right before COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So
thankfully.
yeah, and it was really frustrating. It was really discouraging.
Yeah.
Obviously at the time we didn't know how long it was going to last, but I was completely sidelined. But to your point, it was a blessing because if I had signed a lease, this whole thing might have been over before it started.
Yeah. So then you mentioned a lot of the real real. A lot of people see the sexiness when there's success, right? And they see and they're biased by that. But I think it's a grind, right? And you mentioned being frustrated and discouraged. And through all this, like what was your North Star? What was that kept you, putting one foot in front of the other, getting out of bed and still believing in the dream?
I would say two things. I would say, first of all, my family was huge, supportive, and encouraging, and excited, and very empathetic to how difficult this was, and that really helped me keep going. And then it was just really confidence and belief in myself. I've been fortunate, whether it's ability or it's luck or whatever it's been. I've enjoyed success in a number of different ways, and I just kind of felt like if I'm just going to manifest this, it's going to happen, and I'm just not a guy that screws things up, and I'm not a guy that quits. That was the other thing that I had to keep, you know, having kind of debates and conversations in my own head
Yeah.
where like this is like how am I going to do this? Is this really going to happen? It seems like it really might not happen. And then yeah, but things
Yeah.
generally happen for you.
Yeah. No.
You generally tend to make things happen. So that was
I love
That
it.
was
I love the fact that, the manifestation, the confidence in yourself, coupled with the empathy and support of the family, because, it's a long, arduous, and can be super lonely and discouraging journey. And I'm glad you shared, what kept you putting one foot in front of the other. And a follow-up question is, I really appreciate your discipline where you're like, I'm halfway to the number. I'm a third to the number. So that number sound like some people would take shortcuts and like, let me just edit that number a little bit lower, or let me change it. Did you ever get tempted by that, or what kept you so steadfast in this like adherence to that number?
a couple of things. I'm struck by a memory of a conversation that I had with a very close friend of mine who's another entrepreneur. And I just remember him saying to me, don't do it. Don't cut the corner if you don't have enough money. And I think that it can be tempting, as you suggested, but undercapitalization, really, it's a death sentence.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I really appreciated that advice and I remembered it and I stuck to it. That being said, fast forward to after COVID, we did lower the numbers, but we lowered the numbers because rents had come down and I had different advisors that were telling me that you don't need that much money. You can do it for less if you get the right space and you get the right designers and contractors and all that stuff. So I don't consider that the same as really stopping short of the number and diving in because the world had changed.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. You were just adjusting.
yeah, we were just adjusting, but I didn't flinch until we got to that new number.
Okay, so then when you were talking about signing that lease, right? And does this lease have a personal guarantee, or do most restaurant leases have a personal guarantee?
They have a personal guarantee, but not for but there's what they call a good guy clause,
Okay.
which basically says that, with a certain amount of notice, you can get out of it.
Okay. Notwithstanding that fact, like when you were preparing to sign the lease, tell us more about like finding that place. And did you talk to your investors about it, or you're like, when you saw it, you knew that this was the right place and things were going to start falling together?
Yeah, the site selection, because now we just got to 2020 and the restaurant didn't open until the end of 2023.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so it was a long process. I kind of cut my teeth in commercial retail real estate rental business, which is pretty cutthroat. And I had a couple of places that I was really interested in, that I was really excited about that fell through, that got rented to somebody else. There were two places that I had that I was really counting on renting. One of them got rented out from under me. That was another thing is I was at a real serious disadvantage amongst other renters because somebody comes along with a proven concept or is expanding and has an already established and successful business and they want an additional location that's a better bet for a lot of landlords than a startup
That's a good point.
restaurant company that's just been founded. So that was tough. I had another space that I looked at and I waited for a few months because the landlord assured me that the existing tenant was in default of his lease and was going to be evicted. And that turned out to be a lot more complicated than he thought it was. And ultimately, after waiting and waiting for this tenant to be evicted, he then all of a sudden came up with all the money that he owed the landlord and wasn't in default anymore. So I lost some time on that. And even though there's been so many vacancies in the retail in New York City, I think a lot of them because of the Amazon effect, that there's so many spaces that are vacant, they're not all suitable to be restaurants. So like you can't, it's not easy to to go into a place that used to be the Gap and build a restaurant there because of the infrastructure that you
Yeah,
need.
yeah, yeah.
So it had to be a former restaurant. And that was in our budget that we really
Yeah.
wanted to get a place that was as turnkey as possible as far as equipment was concerned. So we could limit our investment in, brand new equipment, and turning a white box into a restaurant would have cost a lot more money. Finally, I found the space and, we signed the lease in 2021, in December of 2021, but the build out ended up taking 2 years
Whew.
because of a lot of complicated things with permits and the landlord in the city, and it's a landmark building and all kinds of things like that just kept, we got delayed and delayed and delayed before we could get our permits. So that took a long time. We weren't paying rent while that was going on because the landlord was involved in whatever was holding us up. So we actually, it was frustrating. There was a lot of hurry up and wait. It took a long time, but it actually turned out that it actually gave us more time to
Mm.
really plan and build. And we were doing a lot of that stuff rent free for a while.
Yeah. And when I think about the name Haven, right, it
Hmm.
evokes a lot of like ideas and images in my head. So can you share why you chose that name?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Yonkers, New York, and the street that I lived on until I was a teenager was called D Haven Drive. And so it's a little bit of a shout out, my childhood home and my parents. And it was originally going to be called D Haven Bistro or D Haven Bar and Grill, whatever it was. But I was concerned that it would be misinterpreted and it would be read like the Haven, kind of like a
Mm.
slangified the Haven.
Uh,
So we just lopped off the DE and we called it Haven. And particularly coming out of pandemic, it felt like it was appropriate because it's the dictionary definition is, a refuge, a safe space. So it's got a little bit of a dual meaning.
yeah. And then so the first day where you opened up and you had the public come in, not like friends and family, like a trial meal.
Right.
What was that like? What did you feel? What did you experience?
I'm trying to remember. I do remember through this whole process, from going to culinary school to working on the business plan to raising capital to looking for a space to signing the lease. I often was afraid that just operationally, how am I going to do like how am I going to do this? How am I going to make the food and get it to somebody's table and make it like look good and taste good and hot and on time and all that stuff? How does all that stuff work? And I was really intimidated by it. And I think that as just going through the process, you just while you're doing it, you just keep learning and learning and learning and learning. I think what I was really intimidated by and afraid of was I didn't know what I didn't know. And as you get closer and closer, little baby step progress. I'm thinking to myself, like, what are we going to do for ice? And there was an ice machine downstairs and it was old and it was run down. And so we figured out how to get the ice machine working and we called the people who owned the machine because it was leased to them. And they came and they fixed the machine. And the next day we had, tons and tons and tons of ice. And knock on wood, it hasn't failed us yet. But just those little things. I mean, what am I going to do? I mean, how am I going to print the menus? How am I going to,
Yeah.
all those little details that I knew I didn't know or I didn't even think of earlier in the process. We just got there. And I had a lot of great people helping me that were really knowledgeable. That's one of the things I think about building something from scratch is every day something comes up that you just need to educate yourself about because you're the last line of defense.
Yeah.
And you're the one that ultimately has to make the call about how you're going to handle it.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll have all the social media and how to get a hold of Haven or Brian and the links and so forth. But Brian, can you take a minute and just share with the audience, like, what is the concept of Haven and where is it located and the type of food so people are interested in supporting and checking it out?
I appreciate that. We are located on West 79th Street in Manhattan between Broadway and Amsterdam Avenue. We're a 70-seat restaurant where we kind of think of ourselves as being polished casual. Our food is, I'm asked a lot about what kind of cuisine it is, and it's somewhat hard to define. We refer to it as new American or upscale comfort food. It's a lot of familiar dishes. We're not a fine dining restaurant. We're not, most of the things that you see on our menu are things that you can relate to and things that are familiar to you, but maybe with a little bit of a twist. And so one of our signature dishes that we came up with, matzo ball soup, but it's in a miso broth. So it's miso soup with matzo balls, which is really delicious. And most people are just think that it's just a really cool and fun idea, and it actually works. The flavors really go together great, and it's like a little bit of a mashup. And I took a lot of time to deliberately make the menu accessible, to make it affordable, and also to appeal to all different kinds of dietary restrictions and things like that. So one of the things that I remember from school was that one of my instructors told us was talking about the fact that if you have a party of 8 people and one of them is vegan and you don't have anything for them to eat, you might lose all 8 of them because they'll get overruled if that one person doesn't have something that they can eat there.
That's a good point.
So I like to think that the menu is balanced between things that are a little bit more indulgent and things that are a little bit richer, and some dishes that are lighter and more healthful, and also sensitive to people that can't have gluten and who have nut allergies and and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. And then what type of joy do you get when people say like, "Oh, this is delicious," or they leave a great review, or they're like, "Hey, can I talk to the manager or the owner?" And you happen to be there. Like, what's that joy like?
It's the best thing ever. It is the payoff that I was looking for when I decided to do this. I think to myself, this is why I'm doing this. And that makes, the service part of it, the job is only one part of it, but it's absolutely the most rewarding.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. And, I know that, to turn a potential lost cause into an unlost cause, it takes a village, like anything substantial to accomplish in life. So I'm curious, like, did you have like mentors, resources, books, podcasts? Like, what resources did you tap on to learn from and be more prepared?
It was mainly school that helped prepare me. Some podcasts here and there. I don't remember none that I could like really point to specifically. I did have a lot of, I think when you're opening a restaurant and people know that you're opening a restaurant, a lot of people know somebody in that world. And so
Yeah.
I had a lot of people introducing me to other people who had been in the industry for a really long time. And those people were really, really super kind to me and very helpful and gave me some really good advice, pointed me in the right direction when I needed something in terms of whether it be an architect or a CPA or having those word of mouth referrals to get you the help that you need from service providers was big. I hired a consultant to help me with the build out and the setup. Again, like didn't know what I didn't know. And these two individuals really helped me. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do it without. I wouldn't have known where to start. They lent their expertise and experience, and it's definitely could not have done it without them.
Yeah. And did you avail yourself of any of the like the small business administration, or they also have these small business development centers? Did you look into any of the governmental kind of organizational help?
Not too deeply. I maybe should have, but I'm not sure why I was somehow sort of convinced that those programs weren't really for me.
Mm-hmm.
That not for me, like I wasn't interested in them, but that they were set up to help people that weren't like
Yeah.
me, people that really needed a lot more of the resources and financial resources. And I'm not sure that I would have, and admittedly, I didn't look into it deeply enough, but I guess I had this assumption, right or wrong, that it was going to be tough to get money from,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
for this project.
Got it. So you opened, you said, was it 2023 or 2022?
2023. So we just had our year anniversary.
Congratulations. So
Thank
how
you.
does it feel to be in business for a year? Because the statistics, most like, especially restaurants will not make it past the first year.
Yeah, I mean, it feels great. In the beginning, I tried to, and I would advise anybody to do this, I tried to really appreciate the accomplishment. Like there was so much time between 2018 and 2023 where it was really uncertain whether this was going to happen at all. And now I go to work and trying to, relish in the like, wow, it really, it's a real thing. It's a real place that people come and eat and enjoy. So it's super, super, super rewarding and still really hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What strikes me about you and your experiences that you're sharing, Brian, is you're humble and you talk about learning but you also enjoy the hustle and bustle and the cooking and, moving around. So like a classic entrepreneur, I'm like, did Brian really have time to take a step back and exhale and be proud and present? I'm like, wow, I really did this versus like, going to the next hustle and bustle. So
Right.
I'm just
Right.
curious, have you had a chance to exhale and be proud of what you've done?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, this is your baby and you really want it and you really need it to be successful. And so, you can't really take your foot off the gas in terms of
Yeah.
like how hard you work. And so there's no real finish line per se. But I do think it's important to reflect a little bit on how difficult it's been, all of the roadblocks that we got through, and how much time and effort went into it. And it's a real thing.
And then what has the reaction been from your family, parents, siblings, loved ones of this journey? And then, obviously a year anniversary now.
Yeah, I mean, it's been phenomenal. They're really excited. They're really proud. They're really supportive. And like I was saying about dinner service being, the most rewarding part of it, we got a lot of people coming by from all different parts of my life that know about it through social media or through other things. So there's often familiar faces coming through and
Mhm.
people I haven't seen in a really long time, and they're really excited. And it's just been that's been among the most fun parts of this whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. As you reflect on this journey and what's one thing you wish you had known a little bit earlier before you embarked on it?
I wish I had known earlier that people on the Upper West Side like to eat like to eat dinner only between 6 and 7:30. Look, I mean, in order to be there, we're talking about a business that's very thin margins and very little room for error. And in order to be successful, you really need to be busy most of the time. And that's been a challenge for us, is that trying to generate business during hours when we don't get a lot of sort of organic business. So, not being located in other types of neighborhoods like, downtown Soho, Greenwich Village, where you could have a dinner rush, at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. It's just not as much of a thing up here. It's very residential. The demographics are a little bit older and everybody likes to eat a little bit earlier. So we're trying to figure out new and interesting ways to market ourselves and to grow a business later in the evening.
Got it. So you might bookend it, start it with like maybe a happy hour special or
Right.
late night.
Exactly. There's a comedy club around the corner that we started partnering with because they don't serve food. So we're trying to cross promote with them to get some of their guests to come with us after the show. The Beacon Theater is really close by, and so we're trying to find ways that we can tap into that so we can get a little bit more of that crowd coming in after their shows are finished, etc.
Yeah, yeah. And for the audience who's listening and who may have a nascent or simmering dream, what would you say to them?
Do your homework, plan very carefully, inform yourself as much as you possibly can, tap all of the resources you can to make sure that you make an informed decision. And life is not a dress rehearsal.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And Brian, since we're a community in this together, right? What asks do you have or requests do you have from the community?
Come eat, come say hi, come meet us, come meet our staff, come try our drinks. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to have you. And I'm there all the time.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. And so if the audience are inspired by your story, and how can they support, contact, or follow your journey moving forward?
havenuws.com is our website. We are also on Instagram and Facebook, and reach out anytime.
Great, great. Well, Brian, you've proven that reinvention is possible at any age and that the risk of regret is greater than the risk of failure. If his story has sparked something in you, take that as a sign to move forward. Please follow Brian and Haven on social media. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, the dream you put on hold doesn't have to remain a lost cause. You have the power to change it into an unlost cause. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, David.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets. The UnLost Cause way, one story and one person at a time.